It all started when the HOA's self-proclaimed queen of property values, Karen, took it upon herself to declare that my farm was an eyesore and a violation of community standards, even though my land was never part of her HOA. My family had owned this farm for generations, long before the HOA development was even built nearby. But that didn't stop Karen from acting as if she had the right to dictate what I could and couldn't do. At first, it was little things, passive-aggressive letters stuffed in my mailbox, notes about how my barn clashed with the aesthetic of the HOA's perfectly curated neighborhood, and complaints that the smell of my cows was polluting her backyard. I ignored her, thinking she would get tired of her antics. But Karen only escalated. Soon, she was organizing HOA meetings specifically to discuss my farm, spreading false rumors that I was running an unauthorized business and was in violation of zoning laws. Her biggest complaint? That my rooster crowed in the morning, disrupting her so-called peaceful mornings. She demanded I get rid of my livestock altogether because this is a residential community, not some backwater farm town. I reminded her once again that I wasn't part of the HO, and she had no say over my land. That only seemed to enrage her further. One day, I woke up to find that someone had put up fake HOA violation notices on my fence, threatening me with fines if I didn't remove all unauthorized farm animals. Karen had taken it upon herself to print out official-looking documents and plaster them across my property as if she had legal authority over me. I laughed it off, but that laughter didn't last long. A week later, I came home to find county inspectors at my door, claiming they had received an anonymous complaint about unsanitary living conditions on my farm. It was clear that Karen had reported me, hoping to get my farm shut down. Luckily, the inspectors quickly realized the claims were bogus, and I was in full compliance with all health codes. But that didn't stop Karen. She was relentless. She started calling animal control on me, falsely claiming that I was abusing my animals. She harassed my farmhands, yelling at them to stop ruining the neighborhood. She even tried to organize a petition to have my farm forcibly annexed into the HOA, thinking that would give her control over my property. I knew I had to take action, but I had no idea just how far Karen was willing to go in her war against me. And I certainly didn't expect the karma that was about to hit her. Karen wasn't just a minor nuisance anymore. She had escalated her antics to full-blown harassment. At first, she tried to drown me in bureaucracy, filing countless complaints to local authorities about my farm. According to her, my property was a blight on the community, my livestock were health hazards, and my equipment was bringing down property values. She even claimed I was running an illegal landfill, citing fabricated evidence that I was dumping toxic waste into a nearby creek. The authorities, familiar with Karen's history of frivolous complaints, investigated but quickly dismissed her claims. However, the constant inspections and paperwork were becoming a nightmare for me. She was relentless, throwing every legal trick she could find to get me off my land. Her frustration mounted when her false complaints got her nowhere, so she took matters into her own hands. One morning, I woke up to discover that my entire irrigation system had been sabotaged. My hoses were cut, my sprinklers smashed, and someone had poured salt into my vegetable garden, completely destroying my crops. I was furious but had no direct evidence linking her to the crime. That was until I overheard her in a local grocery store, gloating to a group of HOA members about how my farm wouldn't last much longer. That's when I realized she had officially declared war. Determined to catch her in the act, I installed additional security cameras, motion sensors, and even hired a private investigator to monitor any suspicious activity. Sure enough, it didn't take long before Karen made another move. This time she convinced a group of HOA members to march onto my property in protest, carrying signs that read, "Our rights and farms don't belong here." They stood outside my house, screaming about how they would take back the land and force me to sell. When I called the police, Karen had the audacity to tell the officers that I was the trespasser on my own land. She argued that my farm was technically part of the HOA jurisdiction, even though my property deed explicitly stated otherwise. The officers quickly dismissed her claims and warned her that any further harassment would result in legal consequences. But Karen was far from done. That night, my security cameras captured her sneaking onto my land with a group of hired workers. I watched in disbelief as they began dismantling my fence, trying to physically merge my property with the HOA's land. Karen had actually paid people to illegally seize my farm. I immediately called the sheriff, and within minutes, police arrived to find Karen standing in my yard, barking orders like a deranged general leading an invasion. When the officers confronted her, she had the gall to argue that she was reclaiming the land for the neighborhood. Karen was arrested on the spot for trespassing, destruction of property, and attempted land theft. But her troubles didn't end there. The security footage I had installed captured everything. Her cutting the fences, directing workers, and even laughing about how they'll never stop us. It was undeniable proof of her crimes. To make matters worse for her, several of the plants she had ordered destroyed were protected species under state environmental laws. She now faced thousands of dollars in fines in addition to criminal charges. Her downfall was swift. The HOA, desperate to distance themselves from her, held an emergency meeting and voted her out as president. But the final blow came when her own home, which she had illegally expanded onto public land, was flagged for zoning violations. The very system she had weaponized against me turned against her, and within weeks, she was drowning in legal battles. What started as Karen's personal war against my farm had now completely backfired. She was not only facing legal repercussions, but had also lost her position, her allies, and her reputation. But just when I thought things were finally settling down, the situation escalated even further. Karen had one last desperate move up her sleeve. It was about to be her most insane attempt yet. After her humiliating arrest and expulsion from the HOA, most people would have taken the hint and backed off. But not Karen. If anything, she became even more unhinged, refusing to accept defeat. She began launching a smear campaign against me in the neighborhood, telling everyone that I was a dangerous squatter who was illegally occupying land that belonged to the community. She printed out flyers with outrageous claims, saying I was running an underground criminal operation, hoarding dangerous chemicals, and even suggesting I was trafficking stolen livestock. Most people saw through her nonsense, but a handful of HOA loyalists still clung to the belief that Karen was their savior. Then came the most insane escalation yet. Karen filed a lawsuit against me. In a stunning act of delusion, she claimed that I had stolen the land from the HOA, falsified property deeds, and engaged in illegal farming practices. The case had no legal basis, and my lawyer assured me it wouldn't go anywhere. But the sheer audacity of it all was mind-boggling. She was willing to spend thousands of dollars just to keep harassing me, even though she was already drowning in fines and legal fees. I countersued for defamation, harassment, and property damage, and my lawyer assured me that if Karen kept pushing, she'd end up in even worse financial ruin. Things took a turn for the bizarre when Karen began physically stalking my property. Security footage showed her repeatedly driving past my house at odd hours, stopping just long enough to take photos and record videos. One night, I woke up to flashing lights outside my window. Karen had actually called the police again to report me for unauthorized land development. The officers, already familiar with her antics, took one look at my valid permits and dismissed her claim. But Karen wasn't done. The very next day, I woke up to find my front gate had been chained shut with a massive padlock. She had literally locked me inside my own farm. This time, I had enough. I called the sheriff's department, and they arrived with bolt cutters, freeing my property. But while they were still there, Karen had the nerve to march onto my land, screaming about how the HOA owns this land and that I needed to vacate immediately. She was waving a stack of fake legal documents, trying to convince the officers that she had proof that my farm belonged to the neighborhood. The officers weren't buying it. When they warned her to leave, she flat out refused, insisting that she had eminent domain over my property. That was the last straw. The officers arrested her again, this time for trespassing, harassment, and filing false legal claims. But Karen's biggest mistake, the one that truly sealed her fate, was what happened next. Furious that nothing was going her way, she took her insanity to the next level. Late one evening, I was sitting on my porch when I heard a loud rumbling sound. I barely had time to react before I saw a set of headlights barreling straight toward my house. Karen, in absolute fit of rage, had decided to ram her SUV into my barn. She crashed straight through the wooden doors, smashing equipment and sending hay bales flying. My security cameras caught everything. She stumbled out of the vehicle, absolutely unhinged, screaming about how she would take down my illegal farm once and for all. I called the cops immediately. This time, there was no way she could talk her way out of it. When officers arrived, they found Karen still inside my barn, ranting about how she was reclaiming HOA territory. They promptly arrested her, this time for felony destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and trespassing. Given her long history of harassment, the court wasn't lenient. She was slapped with thousands in fines, multiple restraining orders, and a lawsuit that would financially ruin her for years. In the aftermath, the HOA, desperate to salvage what little credibility they had left, not only formally apologized to me, but actually offered to pay for the damage Karen had caused. Apparently, Karen's lawsuit against me had completely backfired, and the judge dismissed it with prejudice, meaning she could never file something like that again. Meanwhile, my own lawsuit against her was moving forward, and with the overwhelming evidence I had collected, it was clear I was going to win big. The court ordered Karen to pay me for all damages, legal fees, and emotional distress, a total sum that exceeded $150,000. The final nail in her coffin came when she was forced to sell her house just to cover the debt. With her reputation in shambles, she packed up and left the neighborhood, disgraced and utterly defeated. My farm, on the other hand, was thriving. I upgraded my security, reinforced my fences, and even expanded my property. And best of all, the HOA was too scared to ever bother me again. Karen had declared war on my farm, but in the end, the only person she destroyed was herself.